Hello, Lisa here. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to this deep dive walkthrough of the Osho Zen Tarot. This is a video I've been wanting to make for a very long time. I've mentioned wanting to make it. It's also been requested, but the reason this is kind of an important walkthrough for me is that this was the first ever tarot deck I ever had, and the first one, of course, that I've ever worked with, and the deck that has seen the most use of any deck I've ever touched. So I feel like I know this deck in a very personal way, both forward and backward. It's worth noting that this deck harkens back to the 90s. In fact, specifically, this deck was originally printed in 1994, and this was produced by the Osho Foundation. Now, in recent years, I've become aware of some scandalous things associated with the Osho Foundation. I'm not sure that I would be comfortable giving my money to them today. However, this has been a really impactful deck in my personal journey, and it's one that I have a lot of connection to and a lot of feelings about. That said, before you hit the purchase button, I would definitely encourage you to take a look at some of that controversy and make up your own mind about how you feel about it before you press the buy button. With that said, I want to dive into this deck and how it's read for me, how I use it, and we're going to do a side-by-side deep dive comparison using the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot. But let's dive in just in general to this deck, and I'll talk a little bit about why I was attracted to this deck initially. You can tell this is one of the first ever little Peggy bags that she made me, and it's got this really cute like ladybug inside plush. Okay, anyways. This is my legacy copy, so this is the copy of the deck that I have had since the 90s when I picked it up, and it's aged very, very well. However, I did trim mine when I kind of got into this tarot community and saw that people were trimming their decks. This was one of the ones I really wanted to trim because, as you can see, the imagery just really pops without borders. And we'll be zooming in to look at the cards more closely, but I wanted to give you a quick little look at the difference because I recently picked up, I would say about maybe 6 months or so ago, I picked up a untrimmed copy of the deck. Not to have it, actually, but it was what gave me the bravery to trim my original copy. I picked this up so that I would get a copy of the book because, as some of you know, and I've talked about this on my channel before, when I picked up the Osho Zen Tarot and I wanted to learn to read tarot, I wanted to learn to connect with my intuition, what I did was I bought the set. I got to know the set a little bit. I read the guidebook cover to cover, and then I threw away the guidebook. Now, this is not a practice that I recommend. However, I do think it can be a really good exercise to get to know the general meanings of a deck and then put away the books just to practice for a while. I don't recommend throwing away because then you're in the position I was in where you're like, but I missed that and I want to have that back. So I picked up a secondhand copy of this so that I was purchasing from somebody in the community, and that gave me a backup copy of the deck as well. So you can see how it looks bordered versus borderless. And the backs actually work really well for a trim because it doesn't really seem to affect the design. Now, this is not technically a reversible backing because, as you can see, there's this big red circle that makes it really obvious whether the card is upright or reversed. That never bothered me because reversals really haven't been, I've played with reversals and sometimes I feel like using them, but for the most part I don't shuffle reversals into my decks, so that wasn't really an issue. But that is what it originally looked like with these black and white borders that went all the way around. I really like the way it looks with just the bottom title and the white and the little symbol on the bottom. So something else worth pointing out as we dive in is how you can tell what suit and so forth that you're in the Osho Zen Tarot, because a lot of the artwork, unlike the Fool, tends to go in a very unique way. So how you tell, and for this I'm going to zoom us in real quick. How you tell is these little diamonds. So we have purple diamonds for the majors. We have, we have red diamonds for the wands, for the fire suit. It's not called wands in this deck, it's called fire. We have blue for the cups. We have gray for the swords, or for the air suit, and then we have rainbows for the earthly suit. The other thing that's a little different about this deck, which we'll be talking about when we get there, is that the court cards are symbols. So when you get to the court cards, the right-facing arrow is the page, the left-facing arrow is the knight, the downward-facing arrow is the queen, and the upward-facing arrow is the king. So those are just some important things to know for navigating the deck in general. I did edge my cards in black. As you can see, the original deck has just a standard like no edge finish. And these cards are really nice, actually trimmed. They feel pretty especially sturdy. I'm going to zoom this back out so we can go through the book and then we'll dive into the cards. So this cardstock is kind of that semi semi-gloss, I guess you would call it a satin finish, something that's not quite matte, not quite glossy. If I tip it into the light, because I have a very bright light above me, it will reflect. But in general, these are just typical 80s, 90s tarot card stock where it wasn't glossy, it wasn't matte. Now I could, actually no, I was going to say I could be wrong. They could have been glossier and this is just worn, but then I looked at this old one and it's got the same exact kind of finish. Okay. So let's look at the book and then we're going to do a side-by-side deep dive into the cards. So what's special about the book, in my opinion, is the way that it's set up, because you have a typical layout situation here where you're going to go through, it starts out, and I think there's some information in the front. I haven't read this, if ever, in like years. I'm sure I read it when I first got the deck, but there's a little bit about how to play the transcendental game of Zen. I think it's just about how to use the tarot. But when you get to the individual card entries, here's what I like. There is a sort of commentary, which is your basic card meaning, in my opinion. And I like the way that this card meaning is written up, because it reads with analogies. And I'll give you some examples when we get to some of my favorite stories in the cards. So this side here with the commentary is the side that I sort of used and got to know really well. The stuff on the right is more of that sort of, I would say, writing from that spiritual perspective of Zen, so it's meant to be kind of like that deeper dive into the cards. And I didn't find, while I think that some of these pieces here were helpful, sometimes they kind of went off in their own little direction. I think, if I'm correct, I believe that this part of the writing was supplied by Osho or people in that spiritual group, whereas I feel like the card commentary may have been the artist's card commentary. And I think that's important to note, because this deck was actually illustrated. Does it even say in the guidebook? Mahadeva Padma. Yeah, here it is. So the original illustrations were Mahadeva Padma. Yes, here we go. It was edited by Mahadeva Sarito. The commentaries are based on descriptions by Mahadeva Padma. And then the design is by Mahadyan Amiyo and Mahadeva Sandeepa. There's typesetting and computer graphics by Swami Sambodhi Prem, and production is by Ma Kamal. So Osho himself was not, didn't do any of this, basically. It would have been people within his organization, for sure, which may matter to some of you. So that is how the book is set up. And then in the back, I should point this out because this was helpful to me when I was brand new to tarot. There are some spreads, and these spreads I found to be really, really helpful. There's a diamond spread and a flying bird spread, a key spread, a mirror spread, and I've used all these over the years. And this was actually the version of the Celtic Cross that I first learned, and it may be a little bit different than other versions, but it starts with the issue in the center and then something that diminishes, enhances, or clarifies the issue. Underneath is the unconscious, above is the conscious. Now this says old patterns the old way for the past and new patterns moving into the new for the future. And what ended up sticking in my brain from learning this spread was that the 5 represented journeys just ending and the 6 represented journeys just beginning. And that's the language I tend to go with when I read a Celtic Cross. Then we have the self, your feelings and attitudes, and then you have what you're attracting from the outside. Now I tend to read this as internal influences and external influences, so there may have been some mixed teaching for me when I was learning the tarot, and I kind of blended the two. And then this is my favorite, the 9, position 9 being your greatest wish and your greatest hope and your greatest fear. Here it says your desires and denials. And then 10 says outcome / key. And what's interesting is when I first got this deck, I feel like I remembered learning this as the key to the outcome. So some differences from what I remember based on how it's written up, but that was the version of the Celtic Cross that I learned. And there's a couple of other spreads in here. And then in the back, there's a glossary of symbols. I don't know if I ever used that. I can't remember. And then there's this stuff about Osho, which, because I didn't pick this deck up because I knew anything about Osho or I was interested in Osho's teachings, I picked it up because at the time it was one of the most uniquely illustrated tarot decks that seemed to go its own way. And the colors and the artwork are what attracted me to the deck. And at the time, I was really turned off by all the classic versions of the tarot that were available. And it just is what it is, right? Like I always tell people when they ask me what a good starter deck is, to pick something that you think you will enjoy working with, that you'll look forward to pulling out and looking at, where the artwork really kind of speaks to you, or that it feels like it really speaks to the meaning. And I think that goes a long way towards making it enjoyable to learn the tarot. If you just start with what you think you have to start with, it can really impede the learning process, I think. Okay, so we're almost 10 minutes in and I haven't even gotten to the cards. So this is going to be a very long video, I'm quite sure. Let's dive in. So I have got my Osho Zen Tarot deck in order. And I also have my trusty Centennial Rider-Waite-Smith deck in order. And we are going to do a side-by-side with the Rider-Waite-Smith because I'd like to share some of my thoughts on how these cards speak to the same sort of meanings, as well as where they differ and the usefulness of that or not, depending on your perspective. So I'm going to zoom us in, and then we may dip into the guidebook here or there if there's a story I can't remember, or there's a card where I feel like I don't know it as well. Although, I mean, yeah, we'll just see how it goes. There's a couple cards I remember that I always like kind of go my own way with. All right, I'm going to stop fussing and get us zoomed in. All right, so let's make sure we're in focus, and we are. So actually, I'm going to switch these around because it kind of bugs me to have, I want the Osho Zen on the left. Is that weird? Let's just see. And then we'll put the Rider-Waite-Smith on the right. They're going to slide. I'm such a perfectionist. It's like, no, be in a neat pile. I want you to. Okay, so we're going to start off with our Fool. Now these two I feel like go almost exactly the same way. We have a cliff edge. Now here we have somebody who's prepared to walk off the cliff and is being, I feel, kind of depicted as somebody who's being a little bit oblivious. Whereas in the Osho Zen Tarot, you almost get this feeling like he's literally dancing on the edge of danger and doing it somewhat consciously. He's still got the white rose. He's leaned into the unknown, like his whole body is sort of tipped over into the unknown. And you don't see fear, you don't see obliviousness. We are missing an animal companion in the Osho Zen Tarot, but there's something about the expansive scenery in the background and the fact that the clouds are below him to give you a really strong feel of how high up he is, that to me really illustrates the risk and the danger, but also the expansiveness of this card. I really think this is interesting. So in the Rider-Waite-Smith, we have a magician, and this is somebody who, this card imagery really comes from traditional tarot, where we had sort of that sleight of hand kind of magician, somebody who was doing something on a table, sometimes even trying to distract while doing something else. So we get this magician at a table, and I believe this imagery really harkens back to sort of street magic and things like that. But we know that in the Rider-Waite-Smith, the meaning really is about having everything it takes, being able to manifest your destiny, but also for certain being able to there is that element of sleight of hand, or being able to be a little bit manipulative, particularly when we look in the shadow. In the Osho Zen Tarot, however, the imagery, the keyword here is existence. Did it just say the Fool? Yeah, okay. The keyword here is existence. And we see somebody who is naked and who is staring at this vast universe and recognizing that she is a part of all of that. There's sort of when I see this card, I think of the saying, you are made of star stuff. And this is almost that recognition that you are part of something huge, that you are a part of this big working engine, this cosmos. So to me, the existence card is really about recognizing your potential. And I think that really harmonizes beautifully with our Rider-Waite-Smith understanding of the magician and as above, so below. I think there's a lot of layers where we can look at these and see that they're saying similar things, just in their own unique way. And this is one of the things I just love about tarot. High Priestess, this inner voice card is often what I think of when I think of the High Priestess, and because I worked with this deck for so long, these images are very much embedded in my mind, and when I pull any High Priestess card, at some point in that experience, I almost always picture this card in the back of my mind, you know what I mean? There's a lot of moon and water imagery in the Osho Zen version, and there's a lot of third eye imagery here. The dolphins moving up and down, the peace and the harmony that I see here, it often makes me think of tuning into my own inner wisdom and my own inner voice, and that keyword is a big reason why I have that meaning sort of embedded. And again, I think that speaks very well to the High Priestess. Is there a lot of other layers of meaning to the High Priestess as well? Absolutely. But this is sort of the heart of the meaning that I tend to work with. In the Empress, this was a card that I struggled with a bit in the Osho Zen Tarot. The concept of creativity absolutely ties in both to the number 3, which we have in the Tarot Major Arcana Empress, as well as to the idea of nurturing and birthing projects and birthing our sort of. It's interesting to me because the Osho Zen doesn't focus on the motherhood aspect as so much as it focuses on the concept of mothering, which I think ties in really well to this keyword of creativity, because when we are working on a creative project, we are really birthing something into the world and then nurturing it to its adulthood, right? To its completion. And that really works for me. There's also a sensuality and a gardenish feeling to this artwork in this card. We still have the important symbols. If you'll note, we still have the 12 stars for the zodiac signs. And we still have the flowing water over to her side. Artistically, this card does definitely connect with the art in the Rider-Waite-Smith. It also does its own thing. All right. This one has always been really interesting to me because actually I don't see the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot Emperor as a rebel, but the rebel is who he is in the Osho Zen. And the rebel here is about somebody who is breaking the chains of conformity, which to me, there is a lot of confidence and strength in this card. And so the energy of the card is similar in the sense that when I see the Emperor, I often talk about stepping into your power and being in your authority and recognizing that you can make your own rules and things like that, right? But in the you really see that energy in both of these cards, but they're depicted very differently. Whereas I feel like the Emperor here has a lot of responsibility. The Rebel feels like somebody who's very much on his own path, maybe not even responsible for others. It's more of an individual journey versus a community role or community experience like we see in the Rider-Waite-Smith Emperor. One of my favorite cards in the Osho Zen tarot deck is the Nothingness card. But interestingly, I always forget that this isn't the Death card in the Osho Zen tarot because it is the perfect depiction of the Death card. In fact, I forget which one is the Death card. Which one is the Death card? Oh yeah, Transformation. So interestingly, what stands out to me, and maybe we'll take a quick look at the guidebook. In the Osho Zen, what stands out to me about the concept of nothingness, because this actually isn't nothingness, it's no thingness. It's the absent of thingness. It's pure potential. It's the moment between the inhale and the exhale when anything is possible. And that's always how I read this card with the Osho Zen tarot when it comes up, to the degree that I forget that it has anything to do with the Hierophant card, because to me the meaning is very different. The Hierophant card to me is very much about following wisdom, following existing wisdom, tradition, teaching or teachers, dogma and rulership within existing structures, things like that. But the Nothingness card is really to me about potential and about the end of something old, the beginning of something new, but really the space in between those two places. In fact, if I were to pick this card to be somewhere else in the major arcana, I would put it sort of after the Death card, when we've released something, but before there's a new journey beginning. So it's interesting to me actually now touring this deck in order like this to see it in this position, because I actually don't think of it Hierophant-y at all. And of course, when I learned this, I wasn't all that familiar with the major arcana numbers or to know automatically which card that would represent. But let's take a quick look. I'm going to zoom us out again. Oops, wrong direction. I want to see what the guidebook has to say about the Nothingness card, to see if there's anything else that hints at the Rider-Waite-Smith meaning. So let's just take a peek. There we go. Being in the gap can be disorienting and even scary. Nothing to hold on to, no sense of direction, not even a hint of what choices and possibilities might lie ahead. But it was just this state of pure potential that existed before the universe was created. All you can do now is to relax into this nothingness, or no-thingness, fall into the silence between the words, watch this gap between the outgoing and incoming breath, and treasure each empty moment of the experience. Something sacred is about to be born. So I remember the meaning of this card very well, and the book doesn't deviate. So that tells me that that's exactly how I've always read it, and that's pretty spot on. And I don't think that has a lot to do with the Hierophant, if I'm being completely honest. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts down below if you can see a connection that I'm not seeing between these two cards. But while I think that the Osho Zen matches up with the Rider-Waite-Smith pretty well most of the time, this is definitely one of those deviations that I can pretty clearly see. So next we have the Lovers, and I think these both work. I don't think there's a huge deviation here. We see the unity. I believe that actually in the Osho Zen tarot there's a little bit more of the context of the individuals and then what they create together, because we have this figure and that figure, which to me feel very gender ambiguous, which I also appreciate. And then in this heart below, you also see them and how they're embracing. And it gives me the feeling of there's this individual and that individual, and then there is the love that they create together. And I think that's a useful thing for me when I'm reading about the lovers in tarot readings, to have that concept of the individuals plus what they create. I think that's a cool image. Awareness. Here's another area where I feel like there's a bit of deviation. So we have the Chariot, which for me is about will and moving forward and driving ahead. Whereas in the Osho Zen Tarot, the Awareness card, what we see depicted here is the Veil of Illusion, which within Zen and Buddhist tradition is, I believe Buddhist, but for certain in Zen, is called Maya. Maya, the veil of illusion, is what separates us from truth and from clarity. And what you see happening here is this burning away of the Maya and this little Buddha peeking through, and this concept that when we start to get through or peer through that veil of illusion, we start to see things as they truly are. So it's a different level of awareness. And I think that's really powerful to speak to in a tarot reading. And it's one of the things that I love going to this deck for, is more spiritual based readings for sure. Because of things like this, because I think it speaks to this concept of like getting to the truth. And the Chariot card, while I could make a case for the Chariot card being about getting to the truth, I think is a lot more about will, confidence, and that solar plexus forward push energy. And I don't necessarily feel that with this awareness card in the Osho Zen. This is one of my favorite cards to talk about. And in fact, this is an image I regularly think about when I think about the concept of strength. This card actually reminds me of the story of the lotus flower and how it has to move up through the mud and the dirt and the density and the darkness to find its way to light so that it can bloom and flourish. Only it's depicted in such a simple everyday way, and it's really speaking to, this courage card is really speaking to the courage it takes for a little plant to work its way through the cracks in the pavement to find its own path and eventually bloom, in spite of any hardship or trials that it has experienced along the way. Such a powerful message for the strength card, or the courage card as it's called in the Osho Zen. And I think for me personally, working with the strength card, it often speaks to battling your own inner demons, your own shadow, things like that. And I think these are both excellent images for that, but this has just stuck in my mind so well over the years, and I think it's a really powerful way to express that card. Here in the Hermit, we have a lot more of a synergy, right? The aloneness card is a really beautiful way to express the concept of the Hermit card, because there is loneliness where we're missing somebody else because we feel somehow incomplete, or we're feeling like we're losing out on something. And then there is aloneness, which is the beauty and power of discovering yourself, of working on yourself, of shining a light into the darkness of your own personal spiritual growth path. And I think that works really well for the Hermit. This is another image that is purely embedded in my mind, and I think I want to take a look at the guidebook in a moment to see if this is where I first got this concept. But one of the things I think comes through really strongly in the Osho Zen Tarot is the concept of change for the Wheel of Fortune, and the concept of this yin-yang, or this peaceful place in the center of the wheel. And the outside of the wheel gets increasingly stormy, looking almost like a hurricane with the way that it's depicted. And I got an analogy in my head back in the 90s when I was first learning tarot that I regularly use when I'm reading tarot for clients or for myself, and that is the concept of change. And I've talked about this actually in my book, The Self-Worth Path. The concept of change as a merry-go-round, the kind of merry-go-round you would find in an outdoor kids playground, not the kind that automatically moved with the horses that go up and down, but the kind where one kid would, or multiple kids, would push the wheel, and the other kids would sit on the wheel, and then the kid that was pushing would run and get it going, get the momentum going, and then step back. The kids on the wheel would spin, spin, spin. And it was always really interesting to me how that experience feels, based on where you're sitting on that platform, on that wheel. The kids who would sit near the edges would feel like they were spinning much faster, and that's literally because of wind resistance. They are resisting the wind, therefore it feels much more tumultuous, much more exciting. And the kids that were a little bit afraid or weren't sure, they would sit near the middle, because in the middle was where you were actually not experiencing a lot of resistance to the movement, and so you would feel like you were spinning much slower. The reason I like this analogy for coping with change in general is because with change, when we resist change, it feels much more tumultuous. It feels like we're being buffeted. It feels much bigger and much more powerful, and often much more chaotic and scary. When we make peace with change, we accept it, we move with it, we move into the center, and we sort of find that peaceful place within the change that's happening around us, it suddenly feels a lot less chaotic, a lot less tumultuous, because we're not resisting it. We're moving with it instead of being at the edge where we're pushing back and feeling that resistance. So I'm not sure if I got that from something that I read in the Osho Zen Tarot Guidebook, or if that was something that came to me through my work with the cards, but it's stuck with me for decades. So I'm just going to take a quick look and see if there was anything that hinted at that in the guidebook, to see if maybe that's what sort of was my jumping off point. So it says here The symbol in this card is an enormous wheel representing time, fate, karma. Galaxies spin around this constantly moving circle, and the 12 signs of the zodiac appear on its circumference. Just inside the circumference are the 8 trigrams of the I Ching, and even closer to the center are the 4 directions, each illuminated by the energy of lightning. The spinning triangle is at this moment pointing upward, toward the divine, and the Chinese symbol of yin and yang, male and female, creative and receptive, lies at the center. It has often been said that the only unchanging thing in the world is change itself. Life is continuously changing, evolving, dying, and being reborn. All opposites play a part in this vast circular pattern. If you cling to the edge of the wheel, you can get dizzy. There it is. Move toward the center of the cyclone and relax, knowing that this too will pass. Yes, so this is where I got that initial analogy, because as I was reading about this concept of if you sit near, at the edge, you'll get dizzy, it made me think of that childhood playground toy. And ever since then, that imagery has stuck with me, and it has informed the way that I read this card in any deck. And I think that's really cool. So I actually get really excited when I see tarot decks that picture wheel or the Wheel of Fortune as more of a moving or dynamic wheel of any kind, or one that has a clear center or a clear different thing happening on the outside. This imagery never quite spoke to me when I was learning tarot. I can use this imagery now that I understand it and know it better, but this is the one that really helped me to help the meaning to stick. All right, let's dive back in. This is going to be very long because we're 25 minutes in and we're just to justice, so hang on tight. So breakthrough for justice. Here's another one where I'm actually kind of surprised, because in my mind, this is the Tower card. And I know it's not, because I can also picture the Osho Zen Tarot Tower card, which is different and very Tower-ish. And yet there's something really powerful about this card, because in justice, we often see that idea of consequence for actions, ours or somebody else's coming through. And here we have breakthrough. And it's an interesting idea for me to explore these two and how they compare, because some of my biggest learning moments, my biggest personal breakthroughs, have been at the end of a difficult moment, after some discomfort or after a consequence to my own actions. Within relationships, when you've hurt somebody's feelings and then you learn, or if you handle something badly and then you learn. And I think this is kind of what this speaks to. I don't know if that's the intent with the card, and we really can't do the guidebook for every entry, or we will literally be here for 6 hours. But it's interesting to me to actually think of this card as justice, because I don't think of it as justice. I think of it as breakthrough when I'm reading with the Osho Zen Tarot. So that's interesting. And because I don't use this deck as often these days, I find that it will be interesting to see if, now that I've made this connection, if I think of this as justice / breakthrough in the future. That'll be interesting. Here we have the Hanged Man, and definitely the Osho Zen Tarot card focuses on the concept of evolution and of enlightenment and opening your awareness to new possibilities. You can see here we have a figure that is first sort of on all fours here, like kneeling or crawling, I guess you could say, and then you kind of see 3 phases of existence, and that's what I feel like is described in the book, if I remember correctly. But eventually this person just continues to evolve and look more skyward. You even see that here in the geometry that's happening in the background of the card. So to me, this has always felt like a, actually, now that I see it next to the Hanged Man and I think of some of the other visuals that I use with reading the Hanged Man, this does very much feel like a cocoon opening and butterfly emerging kind of depiction. We're really looking at when we have to necessarily grow and evolve, and we have this perspective shift as a result, because we don't ever look at the world the same after we've had a Hanged Man moment, right? Where we've made some sacrifices, had to sit something out. We usually have a shift in our perspective, and we do look at the world in a new way. So new vision really makes sense. But this was a card that I struggled with more when I was learning this deck in the very, very beginning. I could see the evolution happening, and the evolution is what I focused on, but I can definitely also see how the Hanged Man energy comes into play. And Death. I've always loved the Osho Zen Death card. I love how you see each of these like arms kind of holding a different object that I feel like definitely speaks to transformation. We've got snakes in each of the hands here. We have the lotus flower, which I've described about the lotus. We have the phoenix above. We have a sword, and we have a yin yang, and these are all very like enlightening, improving, evolving kind of images to me. And we have this death figure just barely touching the lip of this sleeping figure, the mouth of this sleeping figure. So it's a really beautiful depiction of death in my experience, and the word transformation obviously works very well for death. So this was a really great way for me to wrap my head around that card. And it certainly feels less intimidating as a new reader than a armor-clad skeleton on a horse trampling people. I'm just saying, like, it's much easier. So I really like that. I really like that depiction. This is such a gorgeous and powerful way to depict temperance, in my opinion. The integration card shows all the different kinds of balancing energies. We have sun, we have moon, we have the eagle, the flighted bird, and we have the swan, the watery bird. We have the Ouroboros at the bottom with the snake eating its tail. We have the yin yang. We have a sort of masculine, feminine sort of energy happening in the face. There's so much here about balance and about opposing energies, finding harmony in between them, which is really at the heart of the temperance card in a lot of ways, I feel. So this is a really wonderful way to see this card. Okay, this is hands down my favorite, probably one of my favorite cards in the Osho Zen Tarot deck, and certainly one of my, probably my favorite depiction ever of the devil. And that is because the devil is not a figure or a person or depicted in that way in the Osho Zen card, but it is conditioning. And the story from the description from the guidebook stuck with me for my entire, for decades again. I was like, for my entire life, but obviously, I didn't start reading till I was 20, but whatever. Anyways, so the conditioning card basically depicts the idea of a lion that was always raised by sheep and always believed it was a sheep and never realized that if it just opened its eyes and saw itself as it truly is, it could literally eat all of these sheep. And it speaks to the concepts of societal conditioning. It speaks to the concepts of being kind of programmed through your life experiences, your childhood, or the ways that you move through society to see yourself a certain way and not recognize that that may not be who you really are. And so the concept of breaking free here takes on a whole new meaning. Whereas in the devil, the traditional devil, oftentimes we're talking really about breaking through from our own negative habits and our own addictions and things like that. That's also true in conditioning, but there's a deeper level of recognizing where those habits and behaviors come from, which has informed my spiritual practice for 20 plus years. I think this is just a really powerful way to look at that energy. And here's the tower that I was speaking to. So one of the things I absolutely love about the Osho Zen depiction is it shows a person. And I've talked about this before, but there's a few things that stand out to me looking at the card with fresh eyes now, is that we have these flames at different parts of the energy body, which make me think of the chakras, all aflame. We still have people leaping from this tower, but the concept here is that this is the self, that it is the self that is being broken down and reborn. As we know is true with the tower, there's this necessary destruction to herald new growth and new birth. Oh, I've always loved how peaceful and calm the silence imagery is for the star card. While it has a moon sitting right at the center of the third eye, there's this foggy lake, starry night, calm and hope and peacefulness in that silence. And it always makes me think of just coming back to yourself, coming back to a place where you can recognize that everything's going to be okay. A lot of times this also has to do with, to me, it's similar energy to the inner voice card of the High Priestess, but at a deeper level, like taking a break, a vacation, like things like that. So I think that works really well with the star card as a harmonizing meaning for sure. Here we have the moon card. And again, this is one where I think in the Osho Zen, I see this card as it is, not so much as it's meant to be, if that makes any sense. I don't try to associate this with the moon card when I get it in a reading, and I don't know that I would have even recognized or thought of it as a moon card. But the past lives card is very much about repeating cycles and repeating patterns in your life and recognizing those and addressing those. And it's a very healing card in that way because a lot of us have work to do in that area. Whereas I feel like the moon in the Rider-Waite-Smith it's still about the things that bubble up from our subconscious and facing our fears and reconnecting with our inner wild. You can see where those meanings can overlap, but I just feel like there's something really rich about the way that the Osho Zen Tarot approaches this imagery and this concept of past lives and the things that karmically come back to you and addressing those, that I think just goes its own way in a cool way. For the sun, we have innocence, and this is one of these cards that I feel like over time has continued to gnaw away at my understanding, not gnaw away maybe, add to my understanding of the tarot. Innocence to me is a card about beginner's mind. It's about somebody who has gotten very old or wise or has accumulated a lot of knowledge and then still comes back to that inner place of joy. This is a card that to me represents me in a way. It's hard to describe, but this way that this old man is looking at this little grasshopper and experiencing this moment of like lighthearted joy despite his age, despite maybe being in a position in his society or in his world where he's somebody that needs to act in a dignified way. There's this sort of like melting away of all of those expectations and just getting back to who he really is and letting that just pure joy in. And it's one of the things that has ultimately, that and the naked baby, believe it or not, have contributed over time to my understanding of the sun card as a representation of authenticity. Everything is revealed in the light of the sun, and there's a clarity and a truth to that card. But I think this is one of those things where as I look at imagery of sun cards, that's one of the things I look for, is somebody being unabashedly themselves, because I think there's a real power to that. And I think that's one of the things that I feel I see when I work with the tarot in the sun card. Love it. The Judgment card, this almost feels like the Beyond Illusion card, almost feels like it is the follow-up to the Hanged Man. When we see that concept of new vision, to me this is like just bursting out of the cocoon, whereas I feel like Beyond Illusion is the time when you are being invited to actually take it that next step, to really fully step into the beauty of who and what you are. Here we have somebody who has closed their eyes, and as soon as they open them, they're going to be exposed to this absolute stunning beauty in front of them. But it's coming from a place of truth, of self-awareness, of stepping outside of the conditioning, having gone through, you know, the fool's journey and moved through these paths, right? Had the breakthrough, had the new vision, the transformation. There's so many like big spiritual lessons in the Osho Zen Major Arcana. And if I'm being honest, it was really a lot of these cards specifically that informed the steps in the self-worth path. And I mean, I'm going to make a whole video about that, but a lot of this, the way that I see tarot, is completely informed by this deck, and I can't untangle the two now, right? They're definitely intrinsically linked, but I really like this as a depiction of Judgment, because I think Judgment as a whole is a card that a lot of us struggle with, and so having a deck that doesn't take this like angel raising people from the dead kind of imagery, it works for me. It really helped me to connect with this card. And I've always loved this depiction of the world. And again, this is one of those images that has always stuck in my mind when thinking about the world card. That idea of the last puzzle piece falling into place, or being placed, I shouldn't say falling, being placed. That place where there's a completed journey, and now that this puzzle is complete, what's the next puzzle? And it's just such a great way to depict this concept of a completed cycle or a completed journey. And it's simple, but it gets right to the point, and I love that. Okay. I'm going to have to pick up the pace, guys, because I'm 10 minutes in, and I've already done 30 minutes on basically the majors. So I'm going to try to move through these a little zippier. The Source, I think, is a wonderful depiction of the Ace of Wands. It's that like sort of, it's that intangible heart of an idea, a concept, a passion. Loved. Okay, this card for sure has informed how I view the Two of Wands. I always see possibility in the Two of Wands. And it's funny because I've been refining over the past couple of years a single keyword approach to the tarot, just for my own self, and then also for an upcoming series I'm planning for the channel. And it's interesting to me that this particular word is the one that comes so easily for me when I think of the Two of Wands. And remember, when I was learning the tarot and I was learning Osho Zen, I wasn't working with any other decks. So I wasn't familiar with the Rider-Waite-Smith imagery. I didn't know the Rider-Waite-Smith imagery, but this word is the word that always sticks in my mind when I think of the Two of Wands, and this concept of this eagle who's up high and can see all the possibilities in front of them. And I think that's very much a Two of Wands energy. This one goes a different way. I love the Experiencing card in the Osho Zen. It's about being really present in the moment and recognizing the gifts that come to you when you let yourself be a part of what's happening around you in the world. This figure is wearing a cloak that matches this tree and is connecting with this tree. And there's this purity of intention in what she's doing. And there's a lot of lessons to unpack in that imagery and in that card. And to me, it kind of does go more spiritually than the Three of Wands traditionally in the tarot. I mean, these all have spiritual meanings, but I see the spiritual meaning more in the Three of Fire of the Osho Zen. Oh my gosh. Sorry, I'm kind of geeking out on this. So yeah, this is I'm just going to stop apologizing for the length of this video. So the Four of Wands in the traditional tarot to me is a moment of milestones and of recognizing how far you've come and taking a moment to celebrate before you reach the end, right? Like taking a moment to notice the success as you go. Whereas the participation card in the Osho Zen is so cool. So if you can really focus on this imagery and imagine that what you're looking at from the top down are four figures of, like, we can say they're people, but they're definitely almost spiritual beings. So four figures from the top. Each figure has one hand down and one hand up. And what they're doing is they're each equally giving and receiving the group energy. So they're creating a cohesive thing together. They're creating sort of a structure and an energy. It's a very magical card to me. And the keyword participation really works for this imagery because the idea is that participation is about equal give and take. And so when I get this card in the Osho Zen, a lot of times to me it speaks of how we're interacting with others in our lives, both professionally or personally. Are we giving and receiving in equal measure? It's like that school group project where, like, if everybody's putting in and taking out in equal measure, everybody wins. But then you often have in these group dynamics one or two people who's like not putting in or taking out equally, and so it throws the balance off. That's kind of what this speaks to me. Very different than the Four of Wands in the traditional tarot as far as I'm concerned. Oh my gosh. Okay, so this one again also doesn't, maybe it does. Okay, hold on. So the Five of Wands in the traditional tarot, it's so funny to me to see these next to their counterparts because I see this as its own, I don't really think often about how this lines up, right? Anyway, okay. So Five of Wands, who's got the bigger stick? They're duking it out. There's a competition element here. Sometimes it's a lighthearted competition. Sometimes people are taking it more seriously. But in the totality card, we have these trapeze artists, and the focus of the painting is on this moment when they're about to grasp hands. And there's this perfect opportunity for cooperation where if both of these figures, and this is what it talks about in the book, and actually there's three figures involved here because there's one holding the feet of this figure in the middle. If all the figures involved here are focused, have their minds on the same goal, then there's this perfect moment that can happen where the handoff goes really well and the act is, or this trapeze act is successful, right? And so it's interesting because this actually is a much more positive interpretation of that Five of Wands energy. If each of these figures were focused on only their own performance, then they not only do they run the risk of ruining the entire performance, but they run the risk of hurting their partners. What would you say about trapeze artists? Their teammates? I'm suddenly blanking on the right word. But so it's really showing what happens when you do cooperate versus compete. So it does work, but it gave me a moment when I first flipped the card. That's so cool. Here we have very similar energy, even directionally, right? This is a tiger on top of the world. This figure is celebrating. There's an accolade feeling here. Very similar energy. Not a lot to add to that. Oh man, here's another one. I typically see the Seven of Wands as somebody who's got the high ground, who's defending themselves, or they feel they have the high ground. Sometimes they're being too defensive, too overly protective of their energy, or sometimes they really are up against a bunch of people or a bunch of obstacles. The stress card in the Osho Zen depicts somebody who is balancing. They're trying to do all of these things. They're red in the face. They're juggling candles. They're blowing on a horn. They're balancing on one of three legs while balancing a bubble here. And all it takes is this little monkey, which looks like he's even a part of the act. He's holding the string, to pop the balloon and everything comes crashing down. So it speaks to the sort of tenuous, unstable energy of this particular seven. And to me, it speaks more of trying too hard, which again, I can see that trying too hard energy in the Seven of Wands as well. And certainly the keyword stress works well for both cards. But I think it's just so much more masterfully depicted as far as what that feels like to be in that position. Really interesting. And there's certainly an element of putting yourself in a precarious position here, whereas I don't think we necessarily get that from the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith imagery. So cool. Traveling for the Eight of Wands. Interesting. I don't see this way. I see this as being on a big journey, on focusing on the journey, not the destination. I get very different energy from the Eight of Wands, so I'm not going to try to make them work together, but I do think these kind of go in different ways. That said, the Eight of Wands in some circles, I think some quite traditional circles, can mean travel, particularly air travel, but I think that's a more literal interpretation of this card and not how I would typically read it. But I do certainly read this as journeys, so that works. But I don't think they necessarily go together. This is so spot on to me and so vividly depicted in the Osho Zen. The exhaustion for the Nine of Wands really, really works. often this person, again, is overworking themselves. And I do think that the Osho Zen Tarot has some specific biases and certainly calls you to look at your own stuff and look at how you're contributing to problems that I don't think a lot of other tarot decks are necessarily super good at. I'm not saying that they should be, but that's one of the cool things that I think the Osho Zen Tarot does very, very well, is it asks you to look at how you're contributing to what you're feeling and experiencing. This is one of those examples. Here we kind of see somebody who I feel like is trying to keep all of these machines in good working order and is really working themselves to the bone, but perhaps they don't need to be working quite so hard. Same thing you could kind of take from the Nine of Wands and the Rider-Waite-Smith. We have somebody who's been beaten and bandaged and is still holding the line, and that's good, but also there's this element of, are you being overly vigilant? Are you being hyper vigilant, right? So, and I think cards like this are what inform the way I look at the the traditional tarot as well. There's an energy and an element in the suppression card of being weighed down and bogged down that I think really works for the Ten of Wands. Again, I don't think Ten of Wands when I see this card, but I think suppression. I think being weighed down. I think of all these cables and ropes that are weighing on this person, and the bowed head and the posture and all of those things that make you feel just like weighed down and heavy. I definitely get that here. Only I get it more tactilely in a way. This feels more like, what I'm trying to say, I think, with this card is that it feels like when I look at it, I can imagine what that feels like. And I can do that with the Rider-Waite-Smith as well, but it's just so vivid here. The color, the absolute like extremity of all of these things like weighing on him. I don't know. It just comes through really strong in this card. I love playfulness for the Page of Wands. I think that really works. And I will say that the court cards in general in the Osho Zen, I think, do a really lovely job of capturing the energy of that court card, because our Page of Wands is definitely open to the magic and playfulness, and this image, I think it really works for the Page of Wands. Intensity for the Knight of Wands definitely works. I mean, if anything, I could have seen that card working for the Knight of Swords as well, but when you see the Knight of Swords, you'll understand that this was definitely the best fit. Directionality is the same here. We have a leftward moving energy. And I definitely think intensity and the way this is depicted works for the Fire Suit Knight very, very well. This also works really well for the Queen of Wands, although I feel like this reads almost more like, now that I see them side by side, this is very fiery, which is great, but it feels more, the sharing card feels more Queen of Pentacles to me in a lot of ways, because I think of the Queen of Pentacles as the person who's going to make sure you're well fed and that you're taken care of and that you're comforted, and she feels more comforting, whereas I tend to see the Queen of Wands as more sensual, confident in her personal power. So this is not, I would say, one of my favorites from the Osho Zen as far as now my current understanding of the court cards, but of course when this was the only deck I was reading with, that worked fine. I just didn't have any comparative point, you know, any comparative information. I absolutely love the Creator as the King of Wands. To me, this is that person who, and I think this was intentional. I'm not going to dig out the guidebook again, but, uh-oh, did I lose my, okay, yeah. In the source card, here what we see is the King is somebody who has mastered this energy. They've got it contained, they're holding on to it, but they're able to mold it and direct it. And I think that super works for the suit. To see the ace kind of in the hands of the King, I think is a really powerful way to look at it. And actually, now that I'm saying that, that's true of all of the Rider-Waite-Smith as well. I mean, the King, Queen, or the King rather of every suit is always holding the ace. Are they not? I think they are. We'll see when we go through the others, but I think that's really interesting. And I'm curious if there's the same synergy in the Kings of the Osho Zen, if they're holding the ace. That would be curious. I'll try to remember to notice that. Okay. Oh, I guess that's not going to be true with the cups because we don't even have a cup here. In the Ace of Water. Okay, I love the Ace of Water in the Osho Zen Tarot. This concept of being fully immersed in the element, going with the flow, is such a beautiful message. It is so wonderful for reading, and it's one of the things that I think makes this deck so effective as a reader. Reading for yourself, reading for others, it's just such a helpful message. And the title / keyword of the card just, I think, really brings home that particular meaning. It's obvious. This person is going with the flow, not against it. Whereas the Ace of Cups I see more as like blessings. Your cup is overflowing. You're being offered something. I don't necessarily see that here, although maybe I suppose I do, in the sense that if you're being offered something and you resist it, so there's some exploring one could do there. I reference this Two of Cups or Two of Water constantly. I've even recently posted this image in a group somewhere that I was talking on social media about the concept of give and take. Here's the beautiful thing to me about the friendliness card, and I'm pretty sure it's depicted this way or discussed this way in the book, which is why it's stuck so well. it's two trees. We have a pink tree and a yellow tree. And where they overlap, they're making orange. So here again is a card where you have this potential for two people to come together and to create something new while holding on to their individual identities. And because that's such an important quality of a healthy relationship, it's the thing that I focus on in both the Lovers card and the Two of Cups in a lot of ways. But particularly when meeting somebody new, is to recognize that it's important to hold on to your own identity. I don't get that from the Rider-Waite-Smith. I definitely get meetings, new relationships, or new partnerships. And it's a lot more, I guess, open to interpretation in the Rider-Waite-Smith. But I just love this focus on what we're creating together in the Two of Water. This works so great. I don't really have a lot to add here. These three figures are dancing in the rain. They're enjoying each other's company. They're celebrating. We see celebration here too. And the imagery is similar enough that I feel like there's not a lot to add. This is one of the things that really, really informs the way that I view the Four of Cups, because the Four of Cups more traditionally tends to focus on this figure being very stubborn, not wanting to take what's offered to them. And I think that's more the shadowy side of this card. Whereas in the Osho Zen Tarot, what we see is somebody who is finding her own truth and her own ideas and her own opinions despite all of these other voices, opinions, perspectives that are surrounding her. She's turning in for what is true for her and what she needs to focus on, rather than focusing on all these external voices. And this is such a powerful card to pull into a client reading as an example, because it's a lot of times we're in situations like this. Sometimes that's why we're going to the tarot for an answer, is because we feel bombarded with other people's advice and other people's opinions, or what we think we should do versus what we think we want to do, that it's really hard to get clarity. And I think we miss that opportunity for this layer of meaning from the Four of Cups. What if the reason he's not accepting that cup is because he knows that's not right for him? He needs to focus on the three cups down here that he has, because this is not right for him to accept. And so I try to come at the fours and the tarot in general from a more balanced place. And I think this is one of the reasons why I tend to see the Four of Cups typically in its light side as figuring out what's right for you before jumping at everything that's offered to you. This, of course, really, really works. The Five of Cups in the traditional tarot, we see them, essentially crying over spilled wine or spilled milk, depending on how you want to express it. In the Osho Zen Tarot, I just always loved the way that this card was described. Here we have a woman who's got her head in her box of memories, and while she's focusing on her memories and focusing on the past, her outside world, which is full of sparkles of joy and happiness, is being neglected. Her clothes are turning to rags around her. So she's missing out on the present and the future because she's so focused on the past, and it just works really, really well. The Six of Cups. This is so much a Cinderella card for me. It looks like Cinderella to me. It's somebody who is like fantasizing and clinging to something that is not necessarily grounded in reality. In this case, she's not necessarily focusing on her past, such as what we see in the Six of Cups in the traditional tarot, or in the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot. I gotta stop doing that because there's many traditional tarots, but in the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot, it's focusing on simpler times from the past, positive times from the past, etc. I feel like this is more like fantasizing about something, again, that's not your current reality. There's definitely a need to get back to the present with both of these cards, I think, oftentimes. But yeah, I think that message comes through loud and clear with that card. This is such a cool change up or shake up for the Seven of Cups. In the Seven of Water in the Osho Zen Tarot, it speaks to the idea of seeing your projections in the other person. So she's seeing this projection of him, and he's seeing that projection of her, and neither of them are seeing who they really are. So they're so focused on their own. And if you understand the concept of projecting, which is where your own experiences inform how you view and interact with other people, you recognize that the truth is always beneath the projections. So there's a lot to unpack here in a reading if you pull this card, and I love that. That said, it doesn't seem to me to speak to the same kind of like analysis paralysis or like decision-making trouble that I think the Seven of Cups sometimes speaks about. But I think the Seven of Cups also sometimes speaks about fantasizing about stuff and not knowing what to focus on. I adore this imagery, the letting go imagery for the Eight of Cups. Obviously, letting go is a wonderful keyword for the meaning of this card. We know that this card is often about recognizing when something has reached its natural conclusion and it's time to put it behind you. Even if it was a good thing, sometimes it's time to release and let go. And this card depicts this drop of water, or of dew, that is clinging onto the edge of the leaf and is about to naturally let go and fall into the water below. It's just such a beautiful moment about right timing, about how the drop doesn't like hold on longer than it needs to. When it's time to let go, it just naturally lets go. And I think that's so beautiful, and it just works for imagining dealing with things like right timing and such. The Nine of Cups. Okay, I actually hate this as the Nine of Cups, to be completely honest, because the Nine of Cups is one of my favorite cards. Well, is my favorite card, I should say, in any tarot deck as far as like what it means. Because to me, the Nine of Cups is about emotional fulfillment. I mean, to be fair, I don't like the Rider-Waite-Smith depiction either. I have lots of other favorites. But the Nine of Cups, or the Nine of Water here, the laziness, this actually does speak to both light and shadow of the meaning, although I think it leans more into shadow. What we see here is somebody who's gotten very, very comfortable, has everything they could possibly want, but has lingered a little too long in sort of sitting in the lap of luxury and not doing the necessary work. So the ground is getting ready to crumble and fall apart underneath him, and he's going to come tumbling down because he's missing the idea that there's still work to be done. And I think there is an important message there about the complacency of being in a Nine of Cups kind of moment where we're just hanging out, we're feeling really cozy, things are good, but are we still doing the work? Because if we're not, then it's going to come and be done to us. You know what I mean? Kind of like a moment that could lead to a tower type experience. Harmony, this is beautiful, very different to me, but shows completion within oneself. There's specifically here a depiction of the connection between the heart chakra and the third eye chakra, and those two chakras in particular being balanced and being in harmony, which is a really beautiful sort of meaning if you're familiar with the energy bodies or you like working with the chakras. Whereas the Ten of Cups seems to me to focus a little bit more on being complete in your relationships, like with other people. I feel like the Harmony card focuses more on inner harmony and completion, fulfillment within oneself. Sorry, I kicked my camera. Fulfillment within oneself versus external fulfillment. So I think these both have important messages, and I think they both have a place. But the Osho Zen Tarot in general, I think, tends to focus more on your own journey rather than your journey with others. Although there's lots of relationshipy stuff still in this deck. Anyway, I babble. Oh my gosh, I love this Page of Cups so much. But again, I didn't actually associate this card with the Page of Cups. But it actually adds a new layer to the meaning when I think of it as the Page of Cups. So let me explain what I mean. In the Osho Zen Tarot, we see somebody who, we see a bird who is in a cage, except the cage doesn't really exist. And as the bird starts to recognize that the cage doesn't exist, the bars are melting away and the bird can go join the other birds. It's a really beautiful message about like sort of breaking away the restrictions you think are there. And I think I can see that in the Page of Cups, because the Page of Cups is a personality who is open to possibility, or who recognizes that there can be good in things. Sometimes there can be a rose-colored glasses element to the Page of Cups and not wanting to see the difficult stuff, but I can see how these can harmonize. I don't think they're saying the same thing, so there's that, but I do see how they can harmonize. This is another, this is great actually in a way, because we do have a directionality shift here. But the Knight of Cups is a card about following your heart. And here we have somebody basically taking a trust leap, leading with the heart and leaping after whatever it is they feel like their heart is calling them to leap after. And that very much speaks to the energy of the Knight of Cups, who is constantly following that sort of heart feeling. But there's so many more messages to unpack here around the concept of trust that I find really useful when reading the tarot, that I really love that card. Queen of Cups as receptivity, this totally works. There's a vulnerability to the Queen of Cups. There's a, again, that receptivity. There's this idea that she's pulling down energy from above and is open to it. Her lotus flower is fully open. That really works for me with this card. And the King of Cups. This is a healing card. Oh, it says healing. That's right. Okay, so the King of Cups is actually somebody I see as a healer, as a nurturer, as somebody with a lot of emotional wisdom. And here we have somebody who is like focusing primarily on the heart chakra and on healing the way that the other energy centers that could be getting in the way, I guess, of connection to the heart chakra. That's what's coming through when I look at this card. But I tend to look at it as a card that's saying we're in need of some healing, or some healing is being explored, etc. Oh man, y'all, this video is going to be long. I keep saying that, but we're getting there. So now we are on to the Ace of Swords, and I actually really like, again, I like the spiritual slant of the Osho Zen Tarot. It's, again, wonderful for anything related to spirit and connection with spirit, because here in the Ace of Swords we have the exploration of consciousness, which consciousness is such a powerful keyword for the Ace of Swords and does it some serious justice, I think. This is, I think, a card that doesn't age well, quite frankly. And And I think it helps to know what the intention of this card is because, and we're going to actually read the entry from the guidebook in case I have rose-colored glasses and am remembering it inaccurately. But I'm going to tell you how I read this card and how I learned the card, and then we'll go from there. It should have been a different title, quite frankly. But this again was the 90s and this was how it was written. This alone would make me hesitant to use this deck in a reading because you never know what mental health things people are going through, and I think that's something to be very aware of and very sensitive to. That said, how I learned the meaning of this card was that this was about decisions and being torn between the two, or feeling torn between two decisions. I'm going to zoom this out actually because we're going to be looking at the guidebook in a moment. And I think that really speaks to the energy of the Two of Swords. What always stood out to me about this card is feeling very, what's the word of being like, precarious. That's the word I was looking for. I knew it was a P word. So feeling very precarious. And this figure is holding onto this side of the cliff with the hands and holding onto that side of the cliff with the feet. And what stuck in my head over years and years of working with this card is this concept of we think we need to choose to let go with our hands and then we're going to fall head first, or let go with our feet and then we're going to fall feet first. But there's no real discussion of, or no real inner exploration of what happens if we let go with both at the same time and then we fly or we float or we're caught by the universe, right? So a little bit of almost tie into this idea of the trust card. That is how I've always read this card. That's how I've always viewed this card. And in fact, this is one of those cards that would make me consider trimming the titles off. But this is the only title that I really struggle with that way. So let's take a look at the book and see what the book had to say about this card. Because at no point do I remember it talking about any actual like mental health conditions. And I wonder if there's, I don't know. Okay, so here's what it says. The person on this card brings a new twist to the old idea of getting stuck between a rock and a hard place. But we are in precisely this sort of situation when we get stuck in the indecisive and dualistic aspect of the mind. Should I let my arms go and fall head first, or let my legs go and fall feet first? Should I go here or there? Should I say yes or no? And whatever decision we make, we will always wonder if we should have decided the other way. The only way out of this dilemma is unfortunately to let go of both at once. You can't work your way out of this one by solving it, making lists of pros and cons, or in any way working it out with your mind. Better to follow your heart, if you can find it. If you can't find it, just jump. Your heart will start beating so fast there will be no mistake about where it is. And that is such a powerful message. It's just that the keyword doesn't do it a lot of justice. And the further commentary over here says, man is split. Schizophrenia is a normal condition of man, at least now. It may not have been so in the primitive world, but centuries of conditioning, civilization, culture, and religion have made man a crowd, divided, split, contradictory. But because this split is against his nature, deep down somewhere hidden, the unity still survives. And so it goes on from there, and it's talking about Zen and whatever. So I think they were the writers of this were trying to come at the word schizophrenia from a more like global place. It's just an unfortunate title. It really is. But energetically, you can see how the meaning of the card definitely comes through in that. It's just, again, an unfortunate title. All right, let's get in a little closer and we'll zoom on to the next card. Three of Swords, and here we have the word isolation. And this concept of being frozen and separated from your emotions. This card really depicts that moment when you're just letting grief and emotion in after a period of walling yourself off against it. When this card has come up for me or for others in readings I've done, it often indicates a disconnection from the heart and a need to get back to that place. Now, this is a great point, actually, since we've only talked about a couple cards. The mind suit or the air suit in the Osho Zen Tarot, to me, has an extra negative slant. I mean, it does in the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot also, but I feel like because of the Zen or more Buddhist slant to this particular deck, the mind is often portrayed a lot more like the enemy than I feel like it is in other decks that go their own way. And I think that's important to remember, is that any deck based on the background or the beliefs of its creator is going to have certain biases or certain slants to the meanings of the cards. And this is a bias that I feel like I can clearly see, so I can mitigate that within my own reading. But it may be something that just, especially if the sword suit is one of your favorite suits or one that you like to see in a more balanced way, this deck does not depict the swords in a balanced way, in my opinion. I still love it though, because I can't help myself. Okay, postponement for the Four of Swords I think works. It again speaks to me to the more shadowy side of this card, because in the Four of Swords we see somebody who's pulled out from battle. They've taken a rest. Sometimes this means a warrior who's fallen mid-battle, and there's a moment of like recognizing that. In the Osho Zen Tarot card, this is somebody who has been walling themselves off from experiencing life and is looking out the window, has been looking out the window kind of longingly, and is just now allowing the understanding that they can go join that world to come into them. That's why you see the color starting to leach into their clothing. So there's this idea of like, I've been sitting here too long and I need to get back out there kind of thing. And I think that really works, this idea of postponement for the Four of Swords. Oh, one of my favorite cards. I love this so much. Okay, so I didn't realize this was the Five of Swords. So the comparison card is a card that I've talked about, again, in many ways and through a lot of my work in body acceptance and in self-worth, because I think it's a really valuable message. It talks about how in the natural world, of course, the bamboo tree isn't jealous of the oak tree for its strength, and the oak tree isn't jealous of the bamboo tree for its flexibility. They just recognize that this is who they are in the world, and they each have different gifts. And so the Five of Swords is kind of what happens when we don't recognize that, and when one person feels like they have to take what somebody else has to be successful. But here there's a lot to unpack in this particular image about body acceptance, about how we view ourselves, that sort of toxic comparison that we can get tied up in. There's so much you could use this card to discuss in a reading, and I really love all those layers of meaning. And there is in the Five of Swords too. It's just there's something about this artwork that just does it for me. So this is super interesting because I don't see this card as the Six of Swords. Obviously, I've said that a lot through this deck, but it's always interesting to see them side by side. You don't really think of, in the Six of Swords at least, you don't think of the burden of this person here who is ferrying this mother and child, or this adult and child, away from whatever turmoil they've been in into calmer waters. You don't really think of that and what role this person is playing. And yet that is the person that is you in the reading, in the burden card. The burden card is about sort of somebody else sort of directing you where you need to go, and you're trying to help, but you're taking on somebody who maybe isn't doing the work for themselves. Really interesting here around ego, especially when you see the rooster up here, around ego and around the concept of like, other people need to help me. There's an entitlement to this. It makes me look at the Six of Swords rather in a more entitled way, like these people are just expecting this help and not necessarily willing to row the boat themselves. Really interesting to see these two, and I'm wondering if now that I've seen them side by side like this, if I will read the Six of Swords differently sometimes. Will I see that entitlement in the future? Because in the Six of Air in the Osho Zen, the lesson and the message is about, it's good to help people, but don't help people to the point where you're literally, look how exhausted and in pain this guy is, right? Because he's letting somebody who's very entitled take advantage of him. And that's a really interesting energy to explore. And I've never thought about reading for the querent as if they were the person rowing the boat. And yet that is exactly what this card focuses on. Really interesting. Another piece you could potentially unpack here, since this one's got the long wand in hand, just like this one has the long oar in hand, you could also unpack this as, are you letting somebody else direct where you're going? Again, if you see yourself as these figures, are you letting somebody else, like what if this guy's more tyrannical, I guess, and he's directing where you go? So there's a whole lot of different ways it makes me think of this Six of Swords. Really cool. I've always loved the politics card in the Osho Zen Tarot because it speaks to the concept, I mean, again, coming at it from a very like specific slant from the organizers that put this deck together. The Seven of Swords is a card about deception, and a lot of times, not always, sometimes we see deception where none exists. The Seven of Swords, or the Seven of Air in the Osho Zen, doesn't even try to bring a balance to this card. It's literally like, it's a snake with like a happy mask. Like this is such a great narcissist card. If you're reading for people who are dealing with somebody like that, this can be a really good red flag that somebody is, and that's interesting because the Seven of Swords can say the same thing, that somebody is wolf in sheep's clothing, right? So, oh, bad example because we had the sheep thing earlier, but it's like, what mask is the person around you wearing? Or, as the Osho Zen would challenge you, I think, what mask are you wearing? Are you being the snake, or are you being affected by the snake, right? Interesting way to look at it. These cards synergize very, very well. The Eight of Swords, or the Eight of Air in the Osho Zen Tarot, speaks to that concept of being completely overwhelmed with different ideas, with different thoughts, with different feelings, and not getting out of your own head. The keyword guilt specifically does narrow the focus of this card to one specific way of feeling bound up and locked up, which is guilt, is one of the ways we do lock ourselves up. And I think that's really powerful when you're doing readings around personal growth or healing or anything like that. I think having a very specific card to talk about the effects of guilt and how we can beat ourselves up and lock ourselves up is really powerful. But again, it does narrow the focus of what that card could be about. maybe that's one of the things that I liked about the Osho Zen Tarot, and one of the reasons why single keyword methods for learning the tarot work so well for me. But it does give you something to focus on, and you can always expand from there. But yeah, I really like that. The Sorrow card for the Nine of Swords. Interesting, because the slant in the Osho Zen Tarot to me is more about letting yourself feel the feelings, giving your feelings space to be experienced. Whereas in the Nine of Swords, I feel like it's kind of like you're working yourself up, maybe for no reason. Very different takes on the card. Both indicate sleepless nights, both indicate kind of inner torment, but just in different ways. I really like the Rebirth card here. I really like that we see camel, lion, and then this like spiritual being. We see again a line of evolution very clearly depicted. And in the guidebook, as I recall, this card speaks to like sort of being in this place where your senses are dulled, where you're maybe just kind of moving through the world, plodding along, not really focusing on anything. And then when we get out of that place, sometimes we actually swing too far the other way, and we go from a place of being kind of like content to like let life happen to us, to a place where we maybe get almost aggressive in our need to prove our worth. And then eventually you get to a place where you harmonize, right? Where you're not in either extreme. And I think that's what this depicts, which is really interesting to me. And I can see how that harmonizes with the Ten of Swords and this feeling of overwhelm and an ending. There's a whole lot to explore here, both in the imagery and in the keyword. But I think the ultimate comparison is still valid, because here we have daybreak, we have the idea of it's the end now and you can move into something new. Definitely comes through. And here again, we see that sort of negative slant of the mind. Here, the mind is depicted as a thing that gets in your way. Whereas the Page of Swords is about learning and clarity and unpacking the details in a really healthy way. This is one of the cards that actually kind of annoys me, but it does speak truly for those of us who get in our heads about stuff. And I think this gives you a way to discuss that, and how, because this is showing like factories and like smog and exhaust, and speaking to how the mind can become just a bunch of clutter. Whereas the Page of Swords is about exploring the power of the mind and has a much more optimistic view. I've always loved this fighting card because I think it works really well for the Knight of Swords. The Knight of Swords has a tendency to wear a ton of armor to prevent having to feel, having to focus on their emotions. And so they're constantly going into battle and they're constantly duking things out. And this really speaks about that sort of focus on fighting to avoid facing. And I think that's often the case with the Knight of Swords. We also have this armor that he wears so proudly and so frequently is rusting. So there's this concept of like, okay, you can only do this for so long and then you've got to face your stuff, right? The Queen of Swords as morality, I think this really works because the Queen of Swords can be a rigidy kind of personality, right? Very like, this is the way, this is the truth, this is the only way, my way or the highway kind of energy comes through a lot of times with the Queen of Swords. Is that always the case? Absolutely not. And a lot of times the Queen of Swords is the truth teller, is the truth speaker. Whereas in the Osho Zen, again, we have this more negative slant, this concept, and we did with the Knight of Swords too, if we're being honest. The Queen of Swords, or the Queen of Air in the Osho Zen Tarot, speaks to sort of that concept of like sticking to the way things should be done, whether or not that really serves you, and the ways that morality gets in the way, like external morality rather than internal morality. A deeper level to this card in a lot of ways that way. And again, I think it takes that negative slant or that shadowy slant right out of the gate, which is not always my favorite thing. And control for the King of Swords, again, we see the shadow of the King of Swords. The King of Swords is very much a strategist, somebody who's an intellectual leader, who is confident about his ideas and his plans and his thoughts and his the way he views things, his concepts, his worldview. And here we see in shadow, that's a very rigid, controlling energy, which can definitely come through with the King of Swords, but it's not the only thing. And I think this really depicts just the shadow. On to the Pentacles. Oh my gosh, this video is going to be so long. I'm going to try to go quicker. I keep saying that, but the Ace of Pentacles is about an opportunity. And interestingly, here in the Osho Zen Tarot, we have this maturity idea. Interesting, now that I see them side by side, this could be the maturing of a stock or a investment of some kind. But I always see maturity more in the realm of sort of learning and growing and doing better. So interesting. Again, I have a more personal growth attachment to this deck, so that kind of makes sense. Here we see somebody who is sort of juggling his responsibilities with these like waves and stormy seas in the background, so he's staying focused on his task. Similar energy here, we have somebody in the middle of a city life who is focused on the present, being mindful and taking each moment as it comes. There's a lot more mastery. There's mastery in both of these cards. In the Two of Pentacles, this idea of juggling our responsibilities well. But I love the element of mindfulness that comes through with the moment-to-moment card. These two I feel like are very different to me. Whereas I see the Three of Pentacles as very much a card of collaboration, of teamwork, and of sort of doing your work, doing your responsibilities, making progress, growing, etc. The Guidance card feels very much like a guardian angel kind of card where you're getting external help. And while yes, I can see that, I guess I can make a case for it because in the Three of Pentacles, we have external help coming to help us grow in our craft. And here we have external help coming in a more spiritual sense to help us in our craft. Okay, fine. I'm with it. I get it. Oh, here's another one where we get the very shadowy meaning, but the same can be said of the Rider-Waite-Smith. In the Four of Coins, we have an idea of material stability and of maybe clinging too hard to what we have. And we, of course, have this very graphically depicted miser card. This reads hoarder, this reads greed to me, whereas this could be read, it's a little blocked off. It's a little maybe over-controlling of one's responsibilities or one's assets, but it's not as shadowy as this is. That said, this is a very memorable image and it definitely worked to help me learn the card. Oh man, I forgot these were the same card. Okay, I love the Outsider. The Five of Rainbows, which is the Five of Pentacles. You see this little boy looking through a fence and you can tell he like wants so bad to go play with the other kids or to go in to have some adventure or whatever. There's this feeling of like, I want to be a part of what that is and feeling left out, which is very much one of the energies of the Five of Pentacles, is feeling left out in the cold. But what's interesting is when you really look up close to this card and you look, in fact, let's zoom it in. I'm going to bring it in and see if I can get us any closer, or I'll bring the card. Oh, I think are we all the way zoomed in? Okay, now we're all the way zoomed in. I'm going to bring it up just a bit so you can see. The chain is unlocked. It's the padlock is open. And that tells us that he just has to move the chains. He, just like with the Five of Pentacles and the Rider-Waite-Smith, they just have to step inside the church. It's right there, right? There's help there. They don't have to be out in the cold. And I think those work really, really well. Oh, I love this combination. Okay, so the Six of Pentacles, giving and receiving. You finally rebalanced your own stuff and you can give back. Or perhaps maybe you were on top and now you're needing some help. There's a few different ways to look at the rebalancing of the Six of Pentacles. In the Six of Earth here, we have two warriors who have come to a compromise and they've agreed to sort of touch pinkies. Like it's just like the barest compromise. They're holding on to their own ideals. They're not compromising who they are. They're just coming to a middle ground where they can meet up. I love this card. I think it's super useful in readings. I get a lot more from this card, I guess. I guess I shouldn't say more. I get different stuff from this card than I get from the Six of Pentacles, but I certainly see how they're speaking to similar things. I think this works so great to me. The Seven of Earth being patience and this idea of pregnancy and having to wait things out is no different to me than having to see how your crop is going to turn out. And I think these are both very similar cards. There can be peaceful patience, like peaceful waiting, and then there can be kind of nervous waiting. And I think this speaks to both of those. This also really works, and I haven't thought of this as the Eight of Pentacles, but it does make sense. Here we've got somebody who's refined their craft, who they're in a place in their work where they're maybe doing a lot of the same thing over and over again, but it's because they've gotten good at what they do. In ordinariness, we see a very different artistic style to the whole rest of the deck, and it literally looks more mundane. And I think it's to remind you that like when life is good, when things are going well, sometimes it can feel a little boring. It can feel a little routine, but there's beauty in the routine. There's power in the routine. So I think that's really powerful and good. This one I would have never paired up, I don't think. So the Nine of Pentacles, and as I talk through, we'll see if I get there. But the Nine of Pentacles to me is about enjoying the fruits of your labor, which I guess you could see that in ripeness, but I'll tell you how I typically read this card. There's an element of sort of luxury and of enjoying the work that you've put in, being in a place where you can actually soften into that existence. Whereas in the Nine of Earth, I've always seen a card about perfect timing. If we pick the fruit before it's ripe, it's not as good. And this card speaks to how when an apple is perfectly ripe, it naturally falls from the tree. That is the right moment. That is when it's ready. And if we try to rush that process, we get something inferior. And I suppose you can see that when it comes to wealth and responsibility and finances, but it's just, I tend to view this more in general terms of like waiting for the right moment, not feeling like you need to rush the process. We Are the World is always a card that felt a little hokey to me, and it's probably because it just makes me think of the song, and that sort of 70s feel. I don't know. The Ten of Pentacles is so rich with generation and legacy and things like that, and being a part of something bigger is certainly a part of that, but I feel like that's all that the Ten of Rainbows focuses on, and I feel like, or the Ten of Earth, and I feel like it needs to, it just is missing something. It almost feels like this is a world card. I don't know. It doesn't do a whole lot for me. I work with it and it's fine. I mean, there's always going to be a card or two, I think, in any deck that you're like, it's okay. That was one of those for me. Page of Pentacles and Adventure. It's funny because I actually see Adventure as more of a Page of Wandsy kind of energy, but definitely being willing to explore and dive in and not hesitate to get one's hands dirty or to go play. I think that's definitely an element of that card. Slowing down super works for the Knight of Pentacles. This always makes me think of the tortoise and the hare, and I think that imagery works super well for the Knight of Pentacles. Flowering for the Queen of Pentacles. I mean, again, here's a situation where I feel like the Queen of Wands, or the Queen of Fire, let's pull her out again so you can see what I'm saying. I feel like reads more Queen of Pentacles. Like if I were to do anything here, I would reverse these. I'd maybe change the colors. This feels very Queen of Pentacles to me, and this actually feels a lot more sensual and sexual in a way, as I would typically picture the Queen of Wands in the Queen of Pentacles. So it's interesting that this deck kind of puts them in reverse order that way, or in a reverse depiction. I think that's really interesting because that is not how I see those cards. So I do read them. I would say that I probably read this card like I would read the traditional Queen of Wands, and I read the other one like I would read the traditional Queen of Pentacles. And it doesn't seem to get in my way too much because when I'm reading with the Osho Zen, I'm reading based on this deck's energy alone. I'm not going off of rote meanings at all. So that really works for me. But again, I feel like it's in the wrong place. And I love this King of Pentacles and this Abundance card. I think this works really great. This is somebody who is confident and comfortable. They've reached a level where they have success, and they have success where they can be really relaxed. I love the fact that his little belly is exposed. I love the sensitivity in the lotus flower. I think he would also work really well as like a King of Cups kind of energy. And I'm kind of missing the fact that in the King of Cups, we just have that healing card. I wish we had a more like figure, like a more personality kind of energy in that card, but that's okay. This one is so well depicted as somebody who has reached a level of success where they can let it all hang out in a way, right? Like they don't have to be as vigilant, they don't have to be as careful, they can be themselves. That's a cool energy to play with. It's not what I typically think of as the King of Pentacles, although it all makes sense to me. When I pull just the King of Pentacles, I definitely think of somebody who's earned their place in life and that sort of thing, but I don't necessarily think of this more relaxed energy. Interesting. I wonder if that will change as I read in the future. Oh my goodness, you guys. Let's zoom back out. Okay, this was super, super long. I knew it was going to be. I knew this deep dive was going to be a whole thing. But I'm really glad that you decided to hang out with me for this. If you watched the whole thing, you are amazing. There's a lot to unpack in deep diving into a deck that I've used for so, so long. And I have so many feelings and opinions and thoughts about. So thank you so much for joining me on the journey. I have been waiting to do this video for a very, very long time, and I'm glad I finally got to it. I hope it's helpful for you, if for no other reason than that you get to see sort of some different ways of looking at the cards and can decide for yourself if that meaning will inform the way that you read. Even if you never pick up this deck, it's one of the reasons I love watching deck walkthroughs so much, because all these different perspectives just inform the meaning of the cards for me. So thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you in the next one. Please remember to click like, share this video if you know somebody who is interested in a deep dive like this, subscribe, and you will see my videos in your subscription feed. And don't forget to hit the bell and you'll be notified of all my future content. Thank you so, so much, and may your magic always shine from the inside out. Bye, guys.